Trying to think of questions. Okay. And when you've got a question, still get confused with the declaration and the call method. Can you review? Certainly. Feel free to chime in by just yelling out a question if you have one. So let me see if I can talk about the declaration and the call. And to do that, what I'm going to do is switch to another screen here. So let me take a minute to do that. All right, and I'm going to go to screen sharing. And now what you should be seeing is my IntelliJ IDEA screen. Do you see that? Somebody chime in and yell yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So now this isn't Android Studio. This is IntelliJ IDEA, and Android Studio is based on IntelliJ IDEA. So what you're going to see is just regular old Java code, not necessarily Java Android code. I can do Java Android code, but for the purpose of just explaining Java, I'd rather just do plain old Java. So let me go to source here and create a brand new, right click, let's go. Spin, spin, spin. A brand new Java class. And I'm going to name my Java class main. I don't know why, just a good name for it. And main is going to have a method in it. So I guess, what was the original question? Can somebody remind me just to make sure that I'm not answering the wrong question? The difference between a method call and a method declaration?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so let me create a method declaration. And because I'm in main, I'm just going to call it static, and we can talk about why that is later. But anyway, static void do something. And when I do something, let me system out println. Now I'm realizing that this may not be the most wonderful example because it's plain old desktop Java. This is just going to display something on the screen. And let me say I'm going to display the word hello like that. Now that's a declaration. So this says, this is like a recipe. What this says is, when I am called upon to do something, then here's what you should do. You should display the word hello. If you haven't seen system out println before, don't worry about it. It just means that the word hello is going to be displayed somewhere on your screen. If you have just a text console, it'll be displayed there. But the point is, this is a method. It's a method declaration. It just says, here's what it means to do something. This method declaration alone does not make do something happen. It just declares what it means when and if do something should ever happen. So this is like a recipe. A recipe in a recipe book doesn't create any food. It just sits there waiting for somebody to invoke the recipe, somebody to do the recipe. So let's go on here and make a method call. So a method call would say in public void main string args. This is inside of a method, and I have to put it there. A method call would say do something. A method call is just the name of a method followed by the right number of parameters. And in this case, the do something method has no parameters, so the call to do something has no parameters. So when a plain old Java program invokes when you have a brand new class, and when it has a class in it called main, the first thing that happens is that the plain old Java program makes the method call. So in this case, what's happening is, if I run this code, it'll execute that method call statement, which will say, please, please, please execute all the statements inside the body of the do something method, all the statements inside the declaration of do something. So essentially what will happen if I run this program is do something will be executed. I don't know if I'm overstating your example or your question or hitting it on the head. Please let me know. All right, I'm going to unshare the screen. That's clear? Okay, good. Is it possible to modify and return an input parameter? Yeah, let's try it. Let's go to share screen and IntelliJ IDEA again. So let's try the following. Let me create another, this public static void main, sorry. Let me create another method. And again, I'm going to make it static just because I'm inside main, don't worry about it. Let me create a public static int add one more than int x method. And what this is going to do is return x plus 1. And what I'm going to do here is create another int variable called y, and y is going to be 1 more than 5. Now, I'm not really modifying 1 more than, what's happening? Can I run 1 more than? Okay, I take this guy and move it down here and see if that helps. Nope. What's going on here? Cannot, 1 more than int. What is the matter here?
Your spelling of
My spelling of 1 more than is wrong?
Above is
O. Oh, 1 more than. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Nice catch.
Thank you. By the way, is the font big enough? Or is it too small?
Someone has requested to increase the font size in the chat.
Very good. How do I do that?
Yeah, there's some people saying it's too small.
All right, let me go and make it bigger. There we go. Is that better? Or do I need to make it bigger?
Looks good to me.
Looks good.
Looks good? Okay.
People are saying it's better. Yeah.
All right. So what do I got here? I've got a method called 1 more than. And here I've got a call to the 1 more than method. And now I'm feeding it the number 5 as a parameter so that x becomes 5. And now I promised that I would return an int from this method. And indeed I am. I'm returning x plus 1, which is 6. So now then, this expression gets assigned to the variable y, which means y gets the value 6. I haven't really modified the value 5. Well, I better not modify the value 5. But I've taken the value 5, given it here, and then turned it into 6, and returned that. That's an int value that gets returned, and here it gets assigned to y. Okay so far? So does that
Yeah,
answer the
makes
question or
sense.
help answer the question? By the way, I'm not easily able to look at the chat window, so please yell out your questions or your comments.
Oh, I had a question too then.
Sure. Well,
Uh,
first I want to find out if I've answered this question adequately.
Okay, okay.
The person who asked it via chat, what do you think? Okay, let's march on. I think I'm going to switch to Android Studio. By the way,
Okay.
this is feeling weird doing regular desktop Java. So let me do that. I'm going to unshare the screen.
I had 2 questions then in that case.
Sure.
Am I going to ask it now or just wait until you open it up?
Let me wait and get my Android Studio up.
Okay.
So I'm going to start a brand new Android Studio project. And I'm going to call it new app. All right, as this comes up, fire away on your question.
Okay. So if I'm trying to cut down memory usage within an app, is it better to create like the activity entirely in Java, or is it like better to just stick to like creating the activity both in XML and plus Java and Java?
So I think it's a matter of separating the layout, the look of the app from the logic of the app. Most of the time, instead of worrying first about performance, I'm worrying about what the code looks like and how easy the code is to maintain. And code in which the logic is separate from the look is much easier to maintain, much cleaner than code in which the two are mingled together. So I think what you're referring to is the fact that you can describe a layout by writing Java code. Yeah, and that's a possible thing to do, but it's generally not a good practice if you can
Want to make it readable?
Yeah, you want to separate what the code looks like, which is sort of declarative. What does code look like? Well, it doesn't look like I just added a text view. It doesn't look like I just added an edit text. It just plain looks all at once like it has an edit text and it has a text view. So what I do there is I just declare all of the widgets that are going to be in the layout in the XML file. And then to say what happens when the program is running, I put that logic into the Java code. Now, the one exception that I have, the one time when I don't do it that way, is if there's a situation in which I have to add new components to the layout on the fly. So let's say there's a situation where I want to have either one text view or 2 of them or 3 of them or 4 of them, depending on the situation. There are different Android techniques for dealing with this, but sometimes if I want to say, okay, add a brand new text view to this thing because of something the user has done, then I'll add that by including code in the .java file. Does that answer?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
And then if no one else has a question, I just had one more too. If no one else has a question, well, this isn't really a question about Java itself, but more of like tips or simple like tricks that you might use to speed up your process when developing apps in Android Studio. Like because sometimes it just seems like Android Studio takes a long time to build an app or just the overall process. And what kind of tips and tricks do you use?
Have as powerful a machine as you can with as much memory as you can have.
Yeah.
That's I found that processor speed isn't nearly as important as memory. And I don't know if that's not really a tip. That's a go out and buy type thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I have a pretty good computer. It's just like still sometimes gosh, I mean, why does it take this long?
How much
to build
RAM do you have?
16 gigs RAM.
Yeah, that should do it.
Yeah, usually sometimes I might get like 3-minute like build time, or I mean, it depends on the app. And I'm thinking it's because of the like I guess memory leaks, or just like I don't know. I don't think my app is really optimized.
I don't. You're not alone. You're not alone in thinking that Gradle and building it especially is slow. It just seems to happen, and I don't know of any way around that.
Okay.
Someone says I can't even emulate an Android Studio on mine. Yeah, again, my emulator didn't work until I had 16 gig.
Can you please explain context?
I'm sorry?
Can you please explain context?
Context. Context is a bunch of... Now, context isn't about Java. Context is about Android, but I can do my best. Context is a bunch of information about the run of your app at the current moment. And this bundle of information can get passed around from one part of your application to another. So you may have two different methods, one that's designed to, I don't know, that's my phone ringing, just ignore it. One that's designed to, I don't know, display an asterisk on the screen, and another that's designed to get some information from the user. And both of these may, for one reason or another, have to know a lot of extraneous things, seemingly extraneous things about how the app is running and what the app is doing. And all that information is bundled together into a context which can get passed from one method to another. So my entire activity, for example, has all that context information built into it. So when my entire activity is calling some other method that needs to know various things about the running of the app, my activity can pass this, which is myself, my activity, as the context. And it can go to the other method, and that method can say, aha, now I know what's going on in the rest of the app. I can use that information to display an asterisk on the screen, or find out exactly how to ask the user for some information in a text field. Again, keep me honest. If my answers don't make any sense, which they can do, please ask me for follow-up.
I was wondering, in Java, how much does the order that the methods are in matter? Do the order that the methods are written in matter?
I have not seen a situation where that happens. Once in a while, I run into a situation where a method that I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember. Let's put it that way. In other languages, a name has to be declared earlier in the text than when it's used. I haven't run into that situation in Java, but there might be situations in which that's a problem. How's that for honesty? All right. Next. Yeah. Okay. Next question. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have any tips for passing an integer from one activity to another activity?
So I always use put extras and get extras. Is that what you're thinking? Or
yeah, I was using that, but I keep getting like my app start to crash for some reason, saying something's wrong with like a resource that's not coming up anymore.
I guess the next question is, why would they be crashing? I guess it depends on the individual app, right?
It's a Java session.
Yeah, I think so.
Put extra, and so you're going to put extra and give it a name.
Right.
And then you're going to get extra, get integer extra, or get into extra in your activity after getting the intent. And that should work. Now, when you get an error message, when the thing crashes, do you look in the Logcat to see what the stack trace is to show you what went wrong?
Yeah, I've been looking at it. It just keeps saying resource not found exception, string resource ID, and I can't really find an answer as to what's causing that problem.
It almost sounds as if what you need to do is to double check that the name that you gave the extra in
The string name or
the string name
Mhm.
you gave in the extra in the originating activity is the same as the string name that you asked for in the target activity.
Right.
So maybe what I should do is go to another screen here, and let me try this. I'm going to do a share screen, and I'm going to go to presenter. Where is it? Here it is. And now what you should see is whiteness on the screen, right? And maybe my hand.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So here's the originating activity. And here's the target activity right next to it. Now, I'm not going to be doing exact syntax because I'm bound to get something wrong when I'm just handwriting it. But what's happening here in the starting activity is you're saying intent equals new intent. And what you're doing here is you're describing what the target activity should be, either explicitly or by some other means. And after you've done that, you're going to say intent dot put extra, and then you'll give it a name and a value. And again, if I've gotten something wrong syntax-wise, well, just make sure to do what's right, not exactly what I have here. But anyway, now you're giving it, putting an extra value, associating an extra value with that intent. So then you say start activity.
I'm just trying to get us set up because you have yours open. So
intent, like that. And then over here in the target activity, you're going to say intent equals get intent. And that's going to find out what intent it was over here that caused this activity to run. And then you say, with the intent that I just got, get, oops, not get. And this is an integer over here, so it would be get int extra or get integer extra. And then you have to give whatever name you put for the extra here, whatever the name was. And then the number 5 is going to become the value of this entire expression, and you can assign that to something. So I can assign it to x, for example. Now, the big thing that I think can go wrong is if this name isn't the same as this one. It's easy to get confused when instead of just a plain old string, you're using a name that you defined inside of the strings.xml file. That level of indirection, the fact that you didn't actually put a word here or a constant that has a name. If you put it in a strings.xml file, I often tend to spell it wrong or get it wrong or do something that doesn't work. But other than that, I'm not sure what else can cause an error.
I'll look into that. Thanks. I have one more quick question. After
Sure.
you get that number to come on to, like, let's say the second activity, and you want to add to it, like on the quiz, let's say you get another question right, so add 5 more points. What method would you use to kind of get that to run properly? The addition part of that.
So let's say this is int x, and x gets the value 5, right? And then I could just say something like int y equals x plus 5 or x plus 17 or whatever. whatever you want. I wouldn't bother creating a method for it unless you want to do it many, many times. Is that addressing your question, or?
Yeah, I would want to do it more than one time though, like on other activities as well.
So then what I'm going to do is the same kind of thing that I did earlier. And I'm actually going to handwrite it because I think that might be easier to deal with here. So how about this? Int y equals add 2 x, how much? Can you see that?
I can see that.
Now I just have to define the add to method.
Okay.
So let's do that. Let's try that. Int add to int x int how much? No, let's just return x plus how much. Is that what you're looking for?
That sure is.
Okay.
Thanks for your help.
Certainly. Other questions, please.
Hi, Barry.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
My name is Aman, as you could see me. First of all, thanks a lot for arranging this session.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
The last question was a real big help to me too. I wanted to ask a very open-ended question, and it's more towards getting an idea of how to do a particular functionality in Java.
Okay.
So I just completed with my Scorekeeper app, and I was able to get the buttons working as per how they specified. I will be looking forward on sharing that in all the Slack channels. My question is, I wanted to write functionality to undo my last button pressed. Like I wanted to create an undo button, which will actually undo the last functionality that I did. So now let's say I have a button which says +1. So the score becomes like from 25 to 26. Then on pressing the undo button, it again becomes from 26 to 25. So any button that I pressed, and then again when I press that undo button, that last step just gets reversed. Any idea how to do this? I tried.
How different are the different steps that you want to undo? For example, what kinds of things is the user doing that you might want to be undoing? If the things that you want to undo are all the same, then the logic for undoing them is not too difficult. If all the things that you want to undo are, well, undo something that you did in this part of the app, and then undo something that you wanted to do in that other part of the app, undo this text change and somewhere else undo this int change, then it might become pretty cumbersome to decide what to undo and where. So what's the story about the undo? How varied are the kinds of things that you want to undo?
Okay, so I have like a total of 7 to 8 buttons,
right?
Like 4 on each side, and all of these like buttons make changes to some or the other element in my text view. I have like at least 4 different text views which change with the help of these buttons. So like when I press undo, whatever functionality I did before, like pressing a button, that thing should be like reversed. So
Right.
like if the previous button I pressed was adding 6. My Scorekeeper app is mostly cricket. So it'll be like adding 1 run, adding 2 runs, or adding 6 runs, or something like that. So once I press undo, the previous thing should be copied, should be like undooed. Only the last step.
Right. So it seems to me that in order to make this work, you've got to keep a list of what things were done.
Bakit?
And what you want to do is, when you click the undo button, you want to look at the last thing that was done and figure out what would happen to undo that. So I see somebody saying you can just do that by subtracting the last number used. If it's all a matter of adding numbers, then yeah, that'll work. Figure out what number was added last and then subtract the number out. Is it going to be that is it going to be that regular? It's always a matter of adding a number.
Is there any way to save the last state of an app and then just show that state to the viewer? So like every time I press a button, the app will probably have a different state, right? Because it will be printing some other particular value. So by pressing the button, is there any way we can like save the last state of an app and then just show that state to the viewer?
Well, I'm wondering about something else. Is it always a question of undoing the change of a number? Because that's a much simpler problem than saving the entire last state of an app.
Right now, it is undoing the change of a number, but I wanted to make this more advanced in the further, not a part of this course, but I wanted to make it like more advanced and like, you know, try and save like other stuff too. Like if the person has like written his name and then undoing that name or undoing the character. So right now, I just want to focus on undoing the last number or the last button press, but I want to like make it like really generalized.
So there's this thing called shared preferences in Android.
Okay.
And what shared preferences allows you to do is save various things that are going on in an app. And you can decide what to save. So what you want to do is look up shared preferences and figure out which of the things you want to add to that shared preferences group. And when it comes time to make a change to a number or to a text field or to a name, say, okay, I'm going to go to the shared preferences. I'm going to take all the things that were previously set up that I'm going to change now, and I'm going to save them so that maybe later I can use the shared preferences retrieve function to get them back. Now, one of the words that keeps popping up in my head when you're saying this is the word stack. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with data structures. I don't have a computer science background, but I am familiar with the basic data structures. I even thought of, you know, like something, it has to do something with stack, but I've never actually implemented like any stack operation as such.
So you don't have to implement a stack. There's a stack built into Java. And what you can do is push things onto the stack and pop things off of the stack.
So maybe just push a particular state or push something like that and then just pop the last thing out?
Well, let's take the example of numbers. Let's say that I start with 0 and I turn it into 5 and then I turn it into 17 and then I turn it into 22. And I'm going to write down those numbers that I just yelled out at random so that I remember what I'm doing. So it starts at 0 and then it becomes 5 and then it becomes 17 and then it becomes 22. Now, when I turn it from 0 into 5, what I'm going to want to do is call the push method that belongs to Java just to push 0 onto the stack so that I know that 0 is there. And then when it goes from being 5 to 17, I'm going to want to push the 5 onto the stack. So now the stack has 5 on top and 0 below it. And now what I'm showing on the screen is 17. Next, I'm going to push 22, and 17 will also be on the stack. So whenever I hit the undo button, it'll take off the most recently stacked thing, the most recently pushed thing, and then you have to have the logic to revert to that. But the idea is an undo button works in in last in, first out order, which is exactly what a stack does.
Yes, yes. Oh wow, I'm actually getting what you're trying to say. You know, like whatever last value I have, I just like pop that value out and then basically display that and have the logic of, you know, whatever function I wrote the last time, I should basically reverse that function out. So yeah, I mean, I'll
Exactly.
definitely try that out. That's a really good idea. And yeah, thanks a lot.
I just got back. You mean the memory stack, right?
I'm sorry?
I just got back to listening. You meant the memory stack? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, there's a Java class called Stack, and it's built into the Java libraries, the Java API, and you can just create a new stack object, and you can push things onto it and pop things off of it. So you don't need
I thought the memory stack had an in and out thing too, where you reserve memory space and then you delete it, or is that just C++ that I'm thinking of?
I mean, there's a memory stack in Java, but I don't think you want to bother with anything that low level. You just want to use the stack class in order to be able to store things and to pull things off.
Okay, because in C++ we were concerned about, from what I understand, you have to clear out the memory that you're not using anymore.
Yeah, that's a different deal. That's a different deal. In Java, you don't have to worry about that low-level handling of memory.
It does it all itself.
It's, yep. That's what garbage collection is for in Java.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at questions here that have shown up in the chat. It says, instead of making find by ID, put and get all that stuff, why not save any variable to an array, then use that array to access a variable you want with just a few commands? Should work between activities. I guess I don't understand. This is Gregory's post. So Gregory, can you chime in verbally and let us know what I don't understand what you've got here.
Babe. Babe.
What?
Slow your voice.
Greg, are you there? Not vocally. I'll rephrase and send. Okay. Other questions, please.
Barry?
Yeah.
We have a question from a person who doesn't have a mic.
Okay.
And she's interested in what does object-oriented mean in the context of Java?
What does object-oriented mean in the context of Java?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, what's an object in a class and how do they relate to each other?
Okay. Before I get to that, let me just say a quick answer to a question that I saw pop up on the chat window, which is, do we use recursion in Java? And the answer to that is plain and simple, yes, you can. Okay? Objects and classes. I think of a class as a blueprint from which you create objects. So a class is maybe a general description of what a chair might look like, or a general description of what a house might look like. What might a house look like? A house might have a certain number of rooms as one of its characteristics. It might have an outdoor color. It might have a price. It might have all kinds of characteristics. And a class is a general description saying, here are the characteristics that every house will have. It will have a price. It will have a number of rooms. It will have a square footage. The rooms will have a certain shape. All that will be described for each individual house, each individual object, when you create an object, when you say new house. So, for instance, the house that I'm sitting in right now isn't a blueprint. It's not a class. It's an actual house object. It has a certain square footage. I don't know what that is, by the way. It has a certain price. Again, I don't know what the price for this house would be if I were selling it. It has an outside color. All these characteristics are already defined for this house, this particular house that I'm living in. Now, there's another house next door that's another object, and it has a different outside color and a different price and a different square footage and a different number of rooms. So a class describes what are the properties that a house has. An object is an actual instance, an actual thing that has values for those properties. And so, for instance, when I call the sell method that's defined in the class, the sell method says, here's what happens when you sell a house. Take the price and get it from the buyer. Now, what is the price? Well, the price is going to depend on the price that's attached to each object. So, for example, the price for this house may be, I don't know, $100,000, something like that. When I call the sell method that belongs to this house, I'll sell it for $100,000. When I call the sell method for the house next door, that's price might be $200,000. I see a question here that says, what's the difference between object and object instances? None. It's just different wording. Objects and classes are really difficult to understand until you actually have them down, and be gentle on yourself in learning to understand them, because they're tough, but once you do understand them, if you practice enough and work with them enough, you'll get it. You know, the old learning to ride a bicycle thing is always good, but it takes a long time to learn them. So be patient with yourself and read as many blogs as you can about them. How do arrays work in Java? Any book recommendations for Java about beginners? My name is Barry Bird. If you look me up, you'll find out, B-U-R-D. If you look me up, you'll find that I've written some books in the Dummy series, but I'm not supposed to do self-promotion, so I didn't say that. Okay, how do arrays work in Java? Let's go, there we go. Okay, thank you. Let's go to the pad again. And let's go to presenter. Where is it? Or actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to Android. I'm going to, instead of doing that, stop share and new share, screen share, and I'm going to go to Android Studio now. And now arrays in Java. And can everybody see? Is it big enough?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So let me create an array. String words equals hello, goodbye, and yes, and no. Let's just make it capital. It's OCD time for me. All right. And why doesn't it like that? Array initializer not allowed here. Okay, so let's take this guy and move it up. Oops, okay. Ah! All right, let's do something different. New string. Oh, I got it. Hello. Goodbye. Yes. No, like that. And now I could say something like, make a string be one word and make it equal to words one. Now, if I ask for words one, what that's going to give me is the word goodbye, because the string array, this is an array of strings, and the indices for this array are hello has index 0, goodbye has index 1, yes has index 2, and no has index 3. So if I ask for words 1, I'm always going to get not the 0 element, but the 1 element. And if I ask for words 2, then I'm going to get 0, 1, 2. I'm going to get yes. And if I ask for word 0, I'm going to get this guy here, hello. And if I ask for words 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, then I'm going to get a runtime error that's going to say, I'm sorry, there is no 4 element here, because there's a 0 element, there's a 1 element, there's a 2 element, and there's a 3 element. You got to be careful about that because that's an easy mistake to make. So let me try another one. Let me try int array equals new int, I don't know,
Let me get this in first.
3. Or let's do 4 again. And I got to get this a name. So now I've created an array called numbers, and it's got 4 int values in it. So what I can say is numbers 0 equals 42. Numbers 1 equals 68. Oops. Numbers 2 equals 39. That's my age. And yeah, you didn't believe that. I told you I'd lie to you. Numbers 3 equals 10. And now, if I want, I can do something for int I from 0, I less than 4. 4 is the length of the array, you see. So the number has to be less than 4. Always add 1 to I. Do something or other with numbers I. Whoever asked the question about arrays, I don't know if that helps or not. Please let me know if you can, and I can answer more specific questions or talk about it or talk about something else.
How do you make arrays whose elements have more than one data type? So if you wanted an array with strings and integers in it.
One of the things you can do is, generally the idea with an array is all the values in the array have to be the same data type, but you can get around it in Java because you can say object.
Can't you like create your own object?
Yeah, but here's a different way of doing it. So things equals new object, and how many am I going to have? I'm going to have 6 of them in there. Now, the object is the great grandparent of all other classes in Java.
Oh, you don't have a picture?
I'm sorry? So string is a subclass of object, and house is a subclass of object, and horse is a subclass of any class that you create is a subclass of object. So now what you can do is take any kind of object at all and put it into this array. You're going to have a little bit of trouble if you try to put an int value in, because int isn't part of a class,
What's
but
the
we can get
flyers that
into
you
that.
tweet and take a picture of your social media?
Hey, whoever's talking about pictures is unmuted.
I'm going to go back to the Zoom session and do stop share, and then ask for more questions. It says, can I record? I'm recording this, but you can record also if you like.
Okay. Do you have any tips on like reading the Logcat?
What I always do is scroll to the top of each stack trace. There are going to be several stack traces at the bottom of the Logcat. And I always scroll to the top of each of the log traces. And usually at the very top, there'll be like three different three different stack traces. So it'll say there was an error here and here's what caused it, and there was another error here and here's what caused it. And then underneath that, there will be a bunch of other method names saying where it came from. Usually at the very top of each of those tells you exactly where the error occurred. If you take a look and you find out exactly where the error occurred, very often there's something there that seems meaningful enough to tell you what went on.
Okay, that makes sense.
Other questions? All right, I'm going to look at the chat and see if there, yeah?
Oh, I had it in chat. So there's a garbage collection in Java, so we don't ever have to approach cleaning up our memory situation. But I noticed in the arrays are similar, where 0 is the bottom of the heap. Well, that's where I got confused. Heap and stack, the two words. Heap for the memory. And then moves on to 1 as the next level in the heap for the arrays. But what I was wondering was, is that the only part that we noticed that pattern in, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the heap or the stack of memory in Java, or does it show up elsewhere?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
I'm sorry, it's a confusing question. I'm just wondering.
I'll try not to give you a confusing answer.
That's a good, thank you. In the corner of memory in Java world,
yeah,
we don't have to worry about cleaning up our memory slots or taking things out of the trash. It's all taken care of.
Right.
You told me that. Okay. Now, is there anything else that's different in Java about memory? I noticed the arrays are similar in C++, where it starts with 0, which is the bottom of the heap of a memory stack, to 1 is the next placement, to 2,
yeah,
and it never starts with 1, okay?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's you might know C++, or with like Python is similar to C++? Is there anything else that jumps out at you that is something that I could remember that I don't have to worry about with Java in memory? Anything special?
It's been a long time since I've done C++. The big difference, of course, between C++ and Java is that in Java you don't have to think explicitly about pointers. So in Java, there's no explicit notation to say
that
follow the pointer to go to another place.
That's great. I hate pointers.
Also, in C++, if I remember correctly, conversion from one type to another can trip you up much more than in Java, where you always have to do explicit casting.
Okay, so
again, my memory of C++ isn't that good that I can tell you exactly what the differences are. But
that's okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I took away a lot from that. Thank you.
Cool. Is there a way we beginners can create a mental model or a scheme of how to learn Java in general and be better at using it? I have two big tips, really important tips for learning Java or for learning any programming language. One of them is to write as much code as you possibly can. And if that means making up your own small problems and solving them and then adding things to them and then solving them again and then adding more things to them and then solving those and then getting stuck and then having to look it up and then having to put it away for a while and then come back to it, that's exactly what you have to do. The more practice you get with these things, the better. The other thing is, don't make the mistake that I did in the 90s of working on your own without meeting other people and talking to them about the programming language. So I make sure to go to quite a few meetups of programming professionals that meet in my area. And I find this enormously helpful because, number one, it tells me what are the hot topics that I'm missing these days that I should be studying. And the other thing is, it helps me network so that I meet people and eventually they say, hey, do you want to take on this project and earn $1 million? And I say, yes. Not exactly $1 million, but networking with other professionals is a really good idea. So we can make a mental model or scheme how to learn Java. My answer is do as much coding as you can, and sorry if that's not an easy answer. It's the best answer that I can give.
Why is encapsulation important?
Yes?
Why is encapsulation so important?
So encapsulation means that you're taking all the information about a particular thing and putting it in one place. And if you don't do that, then all the information about a particular thing is spread out all over your code, and when you want to make a change to it, it's hard to find all those places where it's been. Encapsulation means that you're taking all of the various things about, say, a date. What does it mean to be a date? And putting it all into one class in your code, which means that when you want to switch to, say, from 2-digit years to 4-digit years, you know where all that information is stored, so you can go in and make the change to the stuff inside that capsule instead of having to look every which way on your project to figure out where to make changes. Encapsulation also means that the details about how dates are stored and how dates are manipulated are hidden from the ordinary programmer who just wants to know what's one day more than February 28th, 1980. Well, what is one day more than February 28th, 1980? Well, it sort of depends on what kind of a year 1980 was. So you don't want each programmer to have to worry about that. You want each programmer to just be able to call a method that's encapsulated, coded, whose details are hidden from the other programmers about how that calculation was done, so that other programmers don't have to worry about those details. That's the kind of thing that encapsulation is all about. As somebody says, as a best practice, everyone should mute if talking. It should mute. That's probably a good idea. And unmute if you want to talk. I think that's good because we've got a lot of background noise right now. Okay, I think what I'm going to have to do then is see who's not muted and mute them.
Another thing too, so with the constructors, that's actually creating an object instance from an object.
I'm sorry, Mac. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm still here.
I was accidentally muting you while you were talking.
That's all right. No, so what I was asking was with a constructor, the constructor is actually what's used to create an object instance of a class itself.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Now, sometimes you'll create an instance not by calling a constructor, but by calling another method. And what's going on under the hood is that other method is directly or indirectly calling a constructor.
Okay. So do you mean when you say that, do you mean like the like let's say .get text, like that's a method right there. So that's calling from another class. Is that what you mean? Like when you say there's another way to call a constructor and that's the way? Like calling a method in line with.
Well, let's say that I have a method that's called getCurrencyInstance.
Okay.
Now, there is such a method in Java. And what it does is that it gets a formatter, and that formatter allows you to turn numbers into currencies to make so that they look like currencies. So you have this method called getCurrencyInstance, and what it does is when you call it, it says, this person wants a formatter for currency. I'm going to call a constructor, and I'm going to decide which constructor to call based on the locale of that particular computer that the person is using. So there are many different constructors that you can call to get a formatter, and it's up to this getCurrencyInstance method to figure out which constructor to call based on what the programmer wants. If the programmer is in the United States, then getCurrencyInstance is going to automatically automatically going to call the constructor that's for the United States currency. On the other hand, if the person who's running the app is in France, then it's going to call the constructor that's for the France currency look. And so sometimes you will create a brand new instance by calling something other than a constructor, but under the hood, that other method will be in turn calling a constructor. Okay?
Yeah.
I think I can mute everyone, and I think I have. Let's see, other questions. Well, any other questions? Okay, I don't hear any others right now.
Do you have any tips on reading the memory monitor? Like the Android memory monitor?
Nope, I don't. I haven't used it much. I see another question here. Really new to programming, but when do you use Logcat and when do you use the debugger? Okay, let's see. I tend to use Logcat more than the debugger. The debugger is good for the following scenario. You know that something's going wrong during the execution of your program, so you set yourself a breakpoint. You say, I want to halt the execution of the program, halt the execution of the app at exactly this point during the run, and at that point, I want to see what the values of all the variables are. So, hey, something's going wrong. I'm doing a divide by 0. I'm going to stop before that happens, and using the debugger, I'm going to be able to look and see which of my many values might be 0. And the debugger is really useful for that, for seeing what's going on internally during the run of the program. Logcat is another story. Logcat is the following. Logcat is giving you a running play-by-play description of what's happening during the execution of your program. If your program crashes, then chances are 99.9% that the last thing that you can see in the Logcat is something that says, an exception was raised. Here's why the exception was raised, because you had an index out of bounds error on an array. Instead of trying to access the 3 element of the numbers array, you tried to access the 4 element of the numbers array, and the numbers array only has 4 elements and they're indexed 0, 1, 2, 3. So you messed up there. So Logcat, for me at least, is good for after the thing has crashed, taking a look and seeing, here's the error message that it generated. Why would it have generated that error message? On the other hand, the debugger is better for saying, what was the value of such and such just before an error occurred? I confess I use Logcat more than the debugger because I often find that debuggers are complicated in and of themselves. And if I'm not being very, very patient, I get more frustrated with the debugger than I get with just plain old looking at the Logcat after the program has crashed. I will be removing that comment after when I post this on YouTube because it's unorthodox and shows my absolute laziness. So there you go. Can you use modulus for staying within the array? Yeah, you can, but it's often not what you want to do. If you are tending to go out of bounds in the array, chances are you did it by accident for a reason where it's not going to be fixed by going from the end of the array back to the start. Does the rearrange code and reformat options in Android Studio affect Java, or is it just the XML? I don't know about rearranging code, but reformatting code is a really, really good thing to do. Because when you reformat code, you can see how it's properly indented if you were sloppy about the indentation. And that always, always makes the code easier to read. Very often I find that before I reformat the code, I think that this part of the code was subordinate to some other part of the code. And when I reformatted, I find out that no, I left off an open curly brace, and it turned out that this part of the code wasn't subordinate to the other part of the code. This block of code wasn't inside the else clause of an if-then-else the way I thought it was. And so reformatting the code that way is always a great thing to do. And it never changes the way the code behaves. It always just tells you what the code really is being interpreted as by the Java system. Let's see. Session helpful. Other questions? More questions? Anything? I love answering questions. Yeah.
Whenever switching from like different activities, should we use like should we like override the onStop method to like clear it from memory? Or like, are there any like ways to clear it from memory? Because like we're switching from one activity to another activity within the same app, and
so I mean, the situation where I usually use that is if there are parts of the when you switch from one activity to the next, and if the new activity completely covers up the existing activity, then the existing activity is going to have its onStop method called. Now, I'm trying to remember if the values in text areas and text views will be creamed by having the onStop method called, and I don't exactly recall. If you find that when you go back to the original activity, when you hit the back button on Android, when you go back to the original activity, if you find that values that were there are no longer there, then that's where you want to call onStop and save things in shared preferences.
Okay.
Is there a future for Java in Android now that they're introducing Kotlin? How are they different or similar? I haven't studied Kotlin yet. I know that it's much more concise. It does a lot of things for you automatically that you have to write a boilerplate code for in Java. I also know that it does a better handling of null than Java does. Whether Kotlin will take over for Java in Android, hard to say. I know that there are a lot of people who prefer Kotlin over Java. So I expect there to be a lot more Kotlin coding than percentage-wise in the next couple of years. Doesn't seem to have taken over completely yet, but it might be going in that direction. Next question, or any other questions, or whatever. May I download your Java memories into mine? And what is the command for that? Download Java Barry's memories. Okay, yep, here you go. Any other questions?
SQLite, yes.
Give me a second, because now there's noise in the background in my house.
All right.
I've got somebody working on my sump pump today. SQLite, yes. Was that a question? I'm sorry, somebody said SQLite, and I don't associate a question with that word yet. Nobody? Okay, any other thoughts, any other questions?
If we're talking about SQLite, can we use Postgres or SQL or any of that with Java, or is that just other languages? Or
You can certainly use it with Java. I don't know how handy it is to use in Android. I've only used SQLite in Android. Anybody else?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hey, sorry. I was the one who said SQLite. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so with the SQLite, I know that it's built into Android.
Yeah.
Is there like a better option to store data versus SQLite, or I know there's shared preferences, there's SQLite, but is there like something better too other than that?
That's a good question. So shared preferences is for a little bit of data, and SQLite is, I would say, for a lot of data. So, for example, I use SQLite in order to, I created my own expenses app because the expenses app that existed were too complicated for me to use. They just involved many more features than what I needed. So I created my own expenses app, and in my expenses app, what I do is every time I enter a new expense item, I add it to my SQLite database. So my SQLite database is this huge collection of expenses, and that's a lot of data, and that's why I use SQLite. Now, an alternative to using just plain old SQLite would be to have an intermediary called a content provider. I don't know if you've seen those in your travels. A content provider is a component in Android that mediates between an app and some big piece of data. So typically what a content provider will do will be mediate between an app and a SQLite database. So you're not getting rid of SQLite there. You're just putting another thing, another component in between the app and the SQLite database. As far as I'm concerned, there are two advantages of using a content provider. One of them is that when you use a content provider, then other apps can also use the same content provider. So if you have a SQLite database that you want to share with other apps, what you do is create a content provider that talks to that SQLite database and then say, I'm willing for other apps to be able to query this content provider, or maybe even add information to this content provider. So when you have a SQLite database belonging to an app in Android, other apps can't get at it. When you create a content provider, then other apps can get at the content provider and maybe get at the SQLite database underneath. So that's kind of one reason for having a content provider. Another reason, possible reason for having a content provider is if you have some bunch of information that's not really stored in a database, but that you want it to look as if it's stored in a database to other apps. Because, for example, other apps are used to issuing database commands. So I may have a bunch of data that's just sort of in a big text file. It's just a CSV file, a comma-separated values file, not a database. But I want to make that data available to other apps, and I want that data to be presented to other apps in ways that make it look as if that data can be accessed with ordinary database commands. Well, that's what a content provider does. It looks to apps as if it's sort of database commands. So other apps can do the regular create, CRUD operations, query, etc., etc. Create, remove, update, delete. Okay. So making a piece of data look like database data, that's another thing that a content provider is good for. Now the next course, I wish, repeat. Oh, well, how about to save an array to a file? Yes, you can save things to a file also. For some reason, I never end up doing it much in Android, but it's certainly doable. Would streaming media be something a content provider works with? Never done that, because streaming media, generally, a piece of streaming media is one enormous lump of data. So a content provider and a SQL-like database are things that you, where you have many, many rows of data, and you want to pick and choose among the rows. So I don't think of streaming media as being something for a content provider, although I may just not have experience with that. There may be situations where content provider is right for media. And another person asks, would that be an API? And I'm not sure what the question means, but I'll answer what I think it might mean, which is that there is a content provider class, and there are methods associated with that class, just like with any other class in the, is streaming media via API? Certainly, absolutely. All right, other stuff. Thank you, I see. Okay, well, good. All right, other questions? Other questions? All right, it looks like we're out of questions, so I want to thank you guys for a stimulating and exciting and interesting to me discussion, and I wish you well on your, one more question. Again, can you show the first part? I'm a beginner. You mean the first part of the presentation? Yes. Can you go over the activity Java side? I'm not sure what that means. Can you go over the activity Java when creating on create? Still not sure what it means to on destroy. Oh, so you're talking about the activity lifecycle? Yes. Okay, let's have a little diagram here. Okay, here we go. When you create a brand new activity, when an activity is first invoked, Android calls the activity's onCreate method. Then Android calls the activity's onStart method. Then Android calls the activity's onResume method. And that's the way things stay for a while the activity is visible and taking up the entire screen. Now, if part of the screen is obscured by, say, a dialog box from another source, then Android calls the onPause method. If the entire activity screen is obscured by, say, another activity, then Android calls both the onPause method followed by the onStop method. And if the activity goes away for some reason, and there are lots of reasons for an activity to go away, then Android calls the onPause method, followed by the onStop method, followed by the onDestroy method. In order to recover from simply having called onPause, Android calls onResume. So if your activity, for example, is partially obscured by, say, a dialog box, then at that point, Android calls onPause. When the dialog box goes away, Android calls onResume. If your activity calls another activity, and that other activity completely obscures your activity, then Android calls onPause and onStop. And when the other activity goes away, for example, because the user hit the back button to go to the original activity, then for the original activity, Android calls onStart and onResume. Now, here's a tricky one. Let's say that you're running your activity, having a grand old time, and the user tilts the phone from being in portrait mode to landscape mode, just tilts it sideways, so that the whole activity has to be redrawn for the requirements of landscape mode. Well, surprise, surprise, Android destroys the activity. So Android calls onPause and onStop and onDestroy. Yeah, the activity's gone. But
Wow.
then immediately after that, in order to recreate the activity in landscape mode, Android calls onCreate and onStart and onResume. So all these lifecycle methods are running all kinds of times when you don't expect them to run. One of the hazards of Android development is if there's data inside of the activity that's not saved when you destroy it and recreate it. And in that case, what you want to do is create an onsaved instance state method, override the onsaved instance state method, and in there what you want to do is save all the things that have to be saved to what's called a shared preferences file, and then restore them when you create, start, and resume by getting yourself back the information that you stored in that shared instances file. And that is an extremely fast discussion of Android life cycles. I'm going to end the sharing, screen sharing, so I can see what's going on. Does Java do that cycle automatically, or you still have to set it? It's not Java that's doing it so much as Android that's doing it. In a regular old Java program, for instance, Java for the desktop, that won't happen. But Android is automatically doing that for you. Android is automatically creating, if you don't define an onStart method, an onResume method, an onPause, an onStop, an onDestroy, Android will call the default methods that come along with the activity class. The reason for your overriding them is to create different behavior than what's in the default behavior.
Okay.
Anything else that I can help with? I love helping.
Barry, I had a question about the launch mode. So I remember.
I'm sorry, one sec. It says what are default behaviors? Default behaviors are so what is it? App compat activity is what main activity always overrides.
Yeah.
So in app compat activity, there's already a built-in onStart method, an onResume method, an onPause method, an onStop method, an onDestroy method. And so there are different sort of behaviors that are coded in those methods. And if you want to look at the source code for those, you can. But that's what you get. You get the methods defined in app compat activity if you don't override them in your own main activity. I'm sorry, Ryan, you had a question?
Yeah, the launch mode. So I remember we, in some of the projects, we set it to something top, single top, right?
That's a really complicated story. There are just a whole bunch of different kinds of behaviors that you can create when you have one activity overlay another. It's called flags, and there are a million different options, and no, I don't remember them all. You have to just take a day when you have a clear head and nothing else on your mind and read through those options. But the issue there is what happens when one activity, what happens when you call start activity and one activity covers up another, and then the other activity goes away. There are a whole bunch of different ways that Android can deal with that. Those different flags say what's the best way, what's the preferred way.
Gotcha, okay.
Anything else? I have one text view and one image view. Using the intent, I want the same action for both views. Currently, okay, I'm reading this. One text view, one image view. Using the intent, I want the same action for both views. Two intents, is there any way I can achieve it by a single intent? This is what seems like a complicated question, and I'm not sure that I understand it. So if you want to chime in and talk with your mic, that would be fine. Otherwise, if you can write it down again and let me know. I don't think of a text view and an image view being associated with an intent, rather another activity being associated with an intent. I will rephrase it. So that's what he said. Somebody says, what about animations? And well, that's a big topic. Anything in particular about animations? Can you list some topics in Java which are just mandatory to be a good developer? Oh boy. The thing that most people ignore when they're first learning in Java is what it means to be an interface as opposed to a class. And yeah, somebody says good code readability. Navigation animation. Okay, that's a big topic. I don't know what I can say about that now. So be sure to take some time out. Again, when you have a clear head and you're not easily frustrated, to learn the difference between an interface and a class, because it's a really important must-know piece of information in Java. I guess the other thing is to get as much practice writing, creating classes as you can, so that you get a good feeling of when to create a class, when to instantiate a brand new object of a class. Interface is a contract to an object. Yeah, that's good. Person who was writing the question about text view to image view and intent, is that, do you have a different phrasing for that? Somebody says they have a question. One sec. Okay. This is going to make for exciting video on YouTube, isn't it? Sitting and waiting for us to listening. Hey, at least there are no commercials, right? Can you define interfaces? So an earlier chat person said it right. An interface is a contract that a class signs by using the word implements. So let me switch to share screen here. And I'm going to go to a new page. Let's say that I have a class called A. And in class A, I have a method named doIt. And then I have some code for the doIt class. And there's some stuff here. There's some lines of code in the doIt method. And now, let's say I have another class named B, and I say extends A. What that means is the class B automatically has a doIt method. So I get myself a doIt method for free by extending A. The terminology that we usually use with extends and subclasses is inheritance. The B class inherits the doIt method. It's very much like the B class being a child of the A class, and it just gets for free whatever the A class had. The big difference between parents and children are that the B class doesn't have to wait for the A class to die in order to get a doIt method. They both have doIt methods automatically just by saying extends A. That's what's going on when we create an extends relationship. Now, let's say we have another thing called interface C. And inside of the C interface, we have void some other method called myMethod. And now typically when we define myMethod inside of an interface, we're not going to give it a body. We're just going to say semicolon here. There are rules in the most modern version of Java that say that you can do it slightly differently, but let's leave it with this. This is what's typically done. And so interface C now is saying, hey, I have something called myMethod, but I'm not telling you what gets done when myMethod is called. You can't call myMethod in C because all I'm saying here is C, the interface, has something to do with myMethod. And the question is, what does it have to do with myMethod? Well, here it is. C, the interface C, is a contract. And that contract says, you people who sign this contract agree to give a body to myMethod in your own code. So up here, let's say that class B extends A, but it also implements C. What that means is that class B is saying, by virtue of saying implements C, I hereby agree that I will create a body for myMethod. In other words, I'm going to have inside my code the same method heading, the same signature, void myMethod. And I'm going to have the same parameter list, whatever that is. And I'm going to actually have code that's inside of a block inside of a body for my method. So this interface C is a contract that, in this case, class B is signing. Now, what's the advantage of signing a contract? Well, when you sign a contract, what it means is that you have certain privileges now. That is to say, any piece of code that wants to make sure that you have a my method can now be sure of it by virtue of the fact that you've implemented C. And in fact, if you promise that you implement C and you don't have a my method, the compiler will yell at you and say, this is bad code. I'm writing all kinds of red lines on this code. I trash this code. I hereby don't like this code. So implement C then says, I promise that I have a my method, and now I'm going to have a my method if I don't want to get error messages in my code. And now any other code that says, I want something that implements C can now automatically use an object from the B class. And that's what interfaces are all about. Whew. I don't know about you, but I like my explanation. All right, here we are. Oh, more questions. Why would someone want to choose interface over abstract class? In an abstract class, you're allowed to define values. You're allowed to define extra stuff in an abstract class. So in an abstract class, you have more freedom to define methods, some methods, bodies for some methods, and you certainly have freedom to define variables and their values, which then get inherited. You can't do that with an interface. Which two methods you need to implement for key object in hash map? Sorry, I don't remember the answer to that question, but I'll look it up or I'll remember it when I'm trying to fall asleep tonight, and then I'll wake up and come to my computer. What's the difference between static void final and so on, extends implements? That's a big, big question. The difference between extends and implements is what I just explained. Static void final is about something else. So static means that there's only one copy of this thing for the entire class. So, for example, with a deck of cards, there might be a different number for each card and a different suit for each card, but there won't be a different shuffle method for each card because shuffle belongs to the entire deck. So static, when you define something in a class to be static, that means there's only one copy of it, no matter how many objects you create, even if you create no objects. Please show the image of the interface again. We'll do that. Okay, there you go. Maybe if I can get more of this on the screen. So, class, interface, and here's a class that both extends the original class A and implements the interface C. I'll leave that up for another, I don't know, 15 seconds or so. And now I'll stop sharing with permission. Another issue is can only inherit from a single class. However, I believe you can implement multiple interfaces, absolutely. Interfaces seem kind of, I'm reading from the chat. Interfaces seem kind of redundant to use. Of course, it's probably not. I'm most likely missing something. class, then why would I just make those methods part of the class to begin with and skip the interface step? Interfaces can, of course, it's probably not. Interface is, yes, you can implement more than one interface. So, for instance, there's the car class, but there's also the drivable interface. And there's also the washable interface. And there's also the pay for interface, payable interface. And there's also the repairable interface. And other things besides cars will be repairable and washable and drivable. So you want all those other classes like the boat class and the airplane class and the roller skates class to also inherit interfaces that indicate that they are rideable or drivable and washable and pay-forable. So interfaces allow a single class to exhibit many different characteristics because they implement more than one kind of interface. And somebody said, can you finish on static? Do you have a specific question about static that I can answer? I just love this. I'm going on and on and on. Every time I say, are there more questions, then there's silence for a while and then more questions pop up. I'm really enjoying it. Roach, you have a question?
No, did I raise my hand?
I don't know. I just see something there. I see how is static created? You were explaining and then you stopped. All right, let me go to share screen. All right, here we go. So I'm going to create class A, and it's going to have two things. It's going to have an int n and a static int I. And so now this means the following. What this means is that at this moment, there is one variable I, and there are no n's, because I have not yet created any objects. So there's going to be one copy of n for every object that I create, and I haven't created any objects yet. So there are none yet. And there's one copy of I, because I do have a class, and I belongs to the entire class. So I have one copy of I, even though I haven't created any objects. So now let me create an instance of the A class. So I'm going to say A something or other equals new A. And by the way, let me create another instance of the A class. So now the diagram that I like to use is, here's the class called A. Here are two objects. One of them is called little a, and the other is called A2. And by the way, I'm abusing the terminology when I write this, but I think we're okay. I think we're, for the purpose of understanding what static means, this is good. How many copies of the I variable are there? There's one. It kind of lives up here. How many copies of the n variable are there? There are two of them. One lives here, and another lives here. Therefore, in other code, I can say, give me the A object's copy of the n variable, and that might be 13. Or give me the A2 objects copy of the n variable, and that might be 76. These two copies of the n variable, each belonging to a different object, may have completely different values. But for the I variable, because it was declared to be static, there's only one of them. So I can say, give me the A class's copy of the I variable. And I'll get one and only one answer, no matter what I do. Now there's a little loophole in Java, a weird loophole, that says that even though the I variable belongs to the entire class and not to any objects, you're allowed to say A.I, and you're also allowed to say A2.I. So you're allowed to ask for the A object's value of I and the A2 object's value of I. However, the IDE will probably give you a warning when you do this because it's weird. And the value of A.I will always be the same as the value of A2.I. So if you change A.I in this code, then it will similarly at the same time change A2.I in this code. So static means that there's only one copy of I because it's declared static, and there are as many copies of n as there are objects because n isn't static. I'm going to go back to stop share where I can see comments. This might have to know, how is it created? Since it is static, you can't modify I, can you? Yeah, you can modify anything that's not final. If something is final, then you can't modify it, but if it's static, you can. Can you override a private or static method in Java? You can't override a private method because it's not available to subclasses. You can override a static method. Might have to do with encapsulation, but could you go over best practices for when you create code that gets a new method versus when you should consider adding code to a method that you already have in your activity? A general rule of thumb is if you're doing the same thing twice and you're tempted to copy and paste code from one part of your program to another, then don't copy and paste it, pull it out and make it a brand new method and call that method from more than one place. Or if a bunch of code, let's say you have, I don't know, 6 lines of code, and you can give a name to what those 6 lines of code do. It says, can you show an example of that? I'll see what I can do. You can give a name to what those 6 lines of code do. These 6 lines of code make a payment for a house. Well, instead of forcing the programmer to read those 6 lines of code and figure out that those 6 lines of code are the ones that make a payment for a house, create a method called make payment for house, put those 6 lines in it, and call the method from the place where those 6 lines used to be. The idea is to make your code, the idea there is to make your code as readable and reliable as you can. Is a recording of this going to be available to us? Yes, it will. And when I post it up on YouTube, I'll post the URL of it on the Slack groups. Yeah. What's your YouTube? I'm gonna, all my code, I think. No, yes, no, I don't know. I think it's barry@bird.org, but I'm not sure. I'll put it up there and let everybody know what it is. And I see, can you show an example of that from Mac? I'm not sure, Mac, what you mean?
When you were talking about the code duplicates, if you find yourself like pretty much copying and pasting code, then it's better to pull a method from that into another object. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. So I mean, at worst comes to worst, you select the code that you want to turn into a method. This is the worst way of doing it.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
All right, okay. You can do refactoring in Android Studio, and I'll get myself into trouble if I try to switch to that screen and show it.
Okay, but you would put that in a method, and then you would make it public so you can use it in different classes.
Well, not necessarily. Let's say I have a class and I have a method, and inside that method I have a pay electric bill, 6 lines of code in which I pay the electric bill. Okay. And I want to make it clear to whoever reads this code that these 6 lines of code are for paying the electric bill. So I either use the refactoring tricks in Android Studio to pull those 6 lines of code out and make them a separate method. Or if I'm being really clunky, I select those 6 lines of code and drag them somewhere else and surround them with a method header and call the method name pay the electric bill and put a call to that method inside, substituting it where those 6 lines of code used to be. Now, the new method that I create doesn't have to be public unless I want to share that method with other classes. If it's just going to be used for my own class, then I'm going to make it private in my own class.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. I think what we ought to do is get a life and quit now and go on and do other things. But again, I want to thank you all for this discussion and encourage you to go on, do as much coding as you can, talk to as many professionals as you can, and really, really, really enjoy working with Android because it's a terrific platform. So have a great rest of the day. I hope you win a pizza. I hope you win a trip to Google I/O. And see you soon.
All right. Thanks.